Good evening. My name is Z.Driskell, Emergency Management Coordinator for the City of Burlington, Vermont. The purpose of our recovery is to rebuild businesses' employment, develop economic opportunities that result in economical resilient communities after the winter weather storm impact, and support and build recovery capabilities for local and state governments to implement disaster recovery activities. The short-term impacts of the disaster are around 400,000 households that need to be reconnected to power due to the destruction of hundreds of electrical transformers and thousands of miles of power lines. We currently have many roads that are still impassable due to ice, snow, and fallen trees, as well as violent crimes are currently occurring in our temporary shelters that have been set up by the Red Cross. Our medium-term impacts include an increased unemployment rate due to businesses closing, financial losses to many industries, and lack of government budgets due to incident response, as well as lack of critical infrastructure, including the electrical grid. Long-term impacts include wildlife, agriculture, and forestry have been seriously impacted by the winter weather. Public workers and impacted citizens are suffering from stress and fatigue due to overworking. The impact from insurance claims to lost revenue accounts for a significant economic impact to the disaster area as well. Our recovery priorities include repairing critical facilities that contain or provide public services, reducing crime occurring in short-term housing facilities, improving resilience of critical infrastructure, expediting recovery of long-term housing, instituting long-term care and treatment of the affected persons due to the winter weather incident, also ensuring business recovery operations to boost employment and commerce to the affected areas. Moving on to our operations. The Recovery Support Branch, underneath the Operations Section Chief, will effectively manage the recovery portion of the winter storm response. The organizations included in the recovery branch include Department of Public Services, Department of Public Safety, VELCO, VDOT, Vermont Department of Transportation, Department of Health, the Department of Agriculture, the Small Business Administration, the Red Cross, FEMA, and Department of Human Services. The Department of Public Works, along with the private industry partner VELCO, are currently repairing the electrical infrastructure in the impacted area. Their response should primarily focus on urban areas with larger populations, as well as infrastructure for hospitals and other critical facilities. VELCO should utilize the new standard for poles and power lines, as well as transformers, to mitigate future impacts from winter storms. The Department of Public Works should also focus on assessing damage at other critical facilities, such as water and sewage treatment plants. Given the opportunity to build more resilient infrastructure, public and private agencies should seriously consider installing equipment with redundant capabilities. The Vermont Agency of Transportation will primarily focus on clearing roads for emergency personnel. Utilizing the mutual aid agreements currently in place, resources should be pulled from surrounding counties and states due to the locally overworked VDOT staff. The Department of Health will primarily focus on assistance required by individuals, families, and their jurisdictions to ensure that immediate needs beyond the scope of the traditional mass care services provided at the local level are addressed. The Department of Health, along with the Red Cross, will continue to provide room and board for those impacted families. The Department of Safety should primarily focus on the safety and security of impacted citizens. The Burlington Police Department is redistributing resources and sending additional officers to the temporary shelter locations with the intent to reduce the level of violent crime and prostitution that's been reported in the shelters. The police department should also focus their efforts on the following priorities: maintaining public order, traffic and crowd control, assistance for evacuations, securing essential facilities, utilities, and supplies, and providing safety and security to first responders. The Burlington Fire Department should continue to focus on search and rescue missions due to the increasing number of carbon monoxide and house fire cases. Impacted citizens should be evacuated to temporary shelters until rebuilding can begin. Due to the significant impact to local businesses and shortage of employment, the Department of Commerce will solely focus on business rebuilding and recovery. The Department of Commerce will work closely with the Finance Section Chief to identify grants and interest-free loans for businesses to assist with recovery. This economic recovery will have a positive economic impact on the entire affected area due to the recreation of jobs. The Department of Agriculture will focus on recovery of direct impacted areas of agriculture, forestry, and wildlife. For example, the Emergency Forest Restoration Program, or EFRP, helps the owners of non-industrial private forests restore forest health damaged by natural disasters. The EFRP does this by authorizing payments to owners of private forests to restore disaster-damaged forest. In addition to the EFRP, the Emergency Assistance for Livestock, Honeybees, and Farm-Raised Fish, or ELAP, provides emergency relief to producers of livestock, honeybees, and farm-raised fish. This program covers losses from disasters such as the winter weather disasters that Vermont is currently recovering from. Moving on to planning. The planning section chief should focus on developing the IAP to mitigate the medium and long-term impacts of the winter storm disaster. Planning should consult the Department of Human Services to implement disaster assistance programs to help disaster victims recover their non-housing losses, including programs to replace destroyed personal property and help obtain disaster loans, food assistance benefits, crisis counseling, disaster unemployment, disaster legal services, support and services for special needs populations. Moving on to logistics. The logistics section chief will continue to procure resources for short-term recovery while also identifying resources for long-term recovery priorities. Short-term recovery resources that are needed include gasoline, blankets, heating systems, and basic necessities. Support also includes procuring resources such as facilities, office equipment, vehicles, cargo trucks, lodging, power generation equipment, and communications gear necessary to support response and recovery efforts, which are currently not readily available. Reports of volunteers and personnel resources are not being utilized effectively. Logistics will serve as a central port for the coordination of the operations of both the donations management program to provide information through the PIO officer to the public what is needed and the most appropriate methods for donating this needed equipment. Logistics will need to capitalize on mutual aid agreements to replace exhausted volunteers and first responders for the second phase of recovery. The Finance Administration Section Chief oversees activities related to tracking expenses of procurement, invoicing, and projections of disaster-related cost. Finance and Administration will also be responsible and is currently working on providing impacted civilians and business owners with available grant and disaster loan options to rebuild homes and businesses. These programs include business physical disaster loans, disaster assistance and emergency relief, disaster unemployment assistance, economic injury disaster loans, home and property disaster loans, and farm ownership loans. Thank you.